Welcome to the discussion. Today we're diving into a controversial take that examines Trump's stance and actions regarding Russia and the idea of pending retaliation. It's a really charged topic, and there's a lot to unpack from the content.
Absolutely, I'm ready to dive in. So, we're talking about how Trump's efforts were portrayed as an attempt to mediate in the Ukraine war, right? And now it seems that his approach has collapsed into something far more provocative.
Exactly. The content, presented by Brian Berletic, who, as you know, is a former US Marine and an international relations expert, lays out this narrative. Trump not only tried to bridge divides, but now seems to be gearing up for what some might call an aggressive or even a retaliatory posture against Russia.
Yeah, interesting. And isn't it ironic how a former mediator, someone who was positioning himself as a peace broker, now appears to have his own war strategy? It raises questions about what his goals really are, right?
Yeah, it's like he set the stage for a potential conflict, almost a strategic shift. The narrative suggests that his mediation effort has now completely collapsed, and instead he's pivoting to a posture that some would say is a veiled war on Russia.
That's wild. I mean, it almost feels like we're looking at a political drama unfolding on the global stage. Now, I'm curious, how does Brian Berletic support that narrative? Is it merely opinion, or does he back it with historical or geopolitical insights?
Good question. Berletic, drawing on his background and expertise, cites a mix of military reasoning and international relations trends. He points to policies and public statements that indicate a shift. He underscores how Trump's earlier claims about being a mediator now seem undermined by aggressive rhetoric and
Right.
actions.
So it's not just about words on a podium, but a broader strategic implication, this pending retaliation concept. It implies that if certain moves are taken by, say, Russia or other actors, then we might see a real military response. Isn't that a pretty stark warning?
Absolutely, it's a stark warning. The content hints that the US could, under this approach, be preparing for an escalatory dynamic. It's like he's setting up a chessboard where every move can lead to a counterstrike. And it's kind of a double edged sword because while it warns adversaries, it also risks throwing, the situation into a more unstable regime.
That's true. I have to ask though, isn't there a risk that Berletic's interpretation might be a bit too one sided? I mean, by focusing on Trump's pivot as a collapse of mediation, aren't we possibly ignoring other factors in US foreign policy that contribute to this dynamic?
That's a fair critique. It's almost like he's framing the narrative in such a way that everything falls on one pivot, Trump's failure, you might say, but it doesn't completely account for the intricacies of policies that have been evolving over time.
Yeah, indeed. Exactly. While the portrayal is compelling, it might oversimplify a very complex world stage. But then again, isn't that partly the point? To spark debate and get people to re examine US strategies?
Right, and that's what makes the content so engaging. It's not just stating facts, but challenging perceptions. Berletic essentially argues that the collapse of Trump's mediation effort is leading us towards a potentially dangerous scenario, a sort of retaliative posture that, if provoked, could escalate tensions further.
Indeed. And this discussion, it seems, ties into a broader debate about the legitimacy and effectiveness of unilateral strategies in international conflicts. Do you think this is just a political ploy, or is there genuine risk of escalation on the horizon?
Oh, it's a mix, for sure. On one side, you have political strategizing. Trump's maneuvers have always had a certain flair for theatrics. On the other hand, given the current geopolitical landscape, any move that looks aggressive can be interpreted as a threat by adversaries. So it's not entirely without risk.
Yeah, I see that. So, how does Berletic explain this pending retaliation? I mean, what triggers or policies does he point to that might serve as a catalyst for an actual military response?
He outlines several factors: strategic signaling, like deploying rhetoric that borders on a direct threat, and then backing it up with policy changes. For instance, there's mention of missile threats, and other military posturing um, that suggest a reorientation from peaceful mediation to a more
Right.
confrontational stance.
And wouldn't that kind of signaling inevitably provoke, well, not just Russia, but also allied nations to, say, recalibrate their strategies? I wonder if that could lead to an unintended domino effect on the world stage.
Exactly. It's like a precarious balancing act. When one major player shifts from a mediator role to a more aggressive one, other global players are forced to re examine their alliances and defenses. It adds a layer of unpredictability to international relations. And honestly, that unpredictability is what really makes the topic so pressing.
That's a solid point. Now, considering Trump's past, many supporters might argue that his strategies were always unorthodox and aimed at shaking up the status quo. Do you think his latest moves are consistent with his prior behaviors, or is this a significant departure?
Well, it's consistent in some ways. Trump has always thrived on being provocative, but this shift to a posture that borders on initiating retaliation is definitely a step further. It's like he's not just being contrarian; he's actively challenging the established order, and that opens up a whole can
True,
of worms.
that's interesting. So if I get this right, the analysis implies that what we have here is a sort of transformation from a mediator to a protagonist in a potential conflict. And the repercussions of that could mean, well, a new chapter in international relations that might not be entirely stable.
Absolutely. And it's a topic that can't be swept under the rug. The debate centers on whether such a transformation is a calculated strategic risk or a miscalculation that could escalate conflicts globally. It's also a reflection of how political narratives can drastically change in response to
I can see
evolving
that.
geopolitical realities.
And just to probe a bit further, do you think that this narrative about pending retaliation might serve to legitimize more aggressive policy decisions, even if they're, more symbolic than strategic?
I think that's the concern. The rhetoric around pending retaliation can provide cover for policies that might otherwise be seen as overtly aggressive. It's almost like by planting the idea that retaliation is imminent, any necessary aggressive policy in response to provocations gets framed within a
Yep,
defensive
that makes
context.
sense. But here's something I do wonder, are there voices cautioning against such a shift in tone? I mean, within the content, or say in broader analyses, is there a counter-argument that suggests that a mediator should stick to dialogue instead of escalating tensions?
Absolutely. There are dissenting views. Some argue that by shifting from mediation to a more militant stance, Trump risks losing the credibility of negotiation entirely. They point out that mediation, even when fraught with challenges, often provides a safer pathway to de escalation. It's a classic debate: tough talk versus measured diplomacy.
Yeah, I like that angle. Right, because while provocative moves can sometimes force an adversary's hand, they equally risk provoking an unnecessary escalation. And history is full of examples where once the first move in a conflict is made, the situation spirals out of control.
Exactly. And what's especially intriguing here is that Berletic's analysis seems to tap into a broader mistrust of political theatrics that blur the line between genuine deterrence and reckless brinkmanship. It's not just about Trump. The whole strategy reflects deeper tensions that are already simmering on the international stage.
Absolutely. So it really becomes an examination of how rhetoric and policy interact. I mean, words like retaliation can have huge power if they change how other nations perceive their security. And if the messaging is off, it can undermine diplomatic channels that might otherwise keep things stable.
Yeah, it's like a double edged sword. On one hand, it can deter adversaries by showing resolve. On the other, it can trigger a chain reaction of defensive measures. And in a world where strategic posturing is so closely watched, every word counts.
Right? Every word really does. Taking a step back, it's fascinating how the content ultimately forces us to confront the delicate balance of international politics. Do we dare to shift from traditional diplomacy, or do we risk, inviting chaos by letting aggressive postures dictate the tone.
Exactly. And that's why this discussion is so compelling. It's about the future of international relations and whether strategies that may seem bold are actually paving the way for unintended conflict. Berletic doesn't just report the facts, he challenges us to consider what if the cost of aggressive posturing is higher than we think?
I totally agree. And that leads us to the broader question of accountability in foreign policy. If a leader's rhetoric can tip the scales toward conflict, isn't there a responsibility to measure the long-term implications rather than just scoring political points?
Absolutely. That's a really critical point. The balance between political messaging and, strategic deployment is razor thin. And here, Berletic's point is clear. When mediation collapses and is replaced by talk of retaliation, it doesn't just shift policy. It reshapes the norms of international
that's key.
engagement.
Overall, it sounds like what we're left with is a tension between provocative political theater and the need for stable, reasoned diplomacy. It really encapsulates some of the most pressing worries of our time.
Indeed, and while some might criticize this framing as overly simplistic or dramatized, there's no denying that the implications are major. Whether you see Trump's moves as tactical or dangerous, the discussion forces us to ask hard questions about how nations will navigate the treacherous waters of modern geopolitics.
Exactly, absolutely. So, to wrap it up, we're looking at a complex scenario where the collapse of a mediation effort isn't just a failure. It potentially signals a shift toward, a more aggressive policy posture that carries enormous risks for global stability.
Yes, and it reminds us that in international relations, context is everything. The interplay between rhetoric and policy, the risks of aggressive stances versus cautious diplomacy. It's a conversation that's bound to continue, and one that we need to keep an eye on as events unfold.
Definitely. Well, that was a robust discussion. I appreciate how we delved into both the strategic implications and the potential pitfalls. It really shows how even a single narrative can open up a doorway into the deeper, complex realities of global politics.
Totally. And it's discussions like these that remind us why examining the layers behind political maneuvers is so critical. It's not just headlines, it's about understanding the evolving dynamics that affect us
Absolutely.
all.
Thanks for the insightful chat. There's a lot to think about when it comes to the balance between provocative policy and measured diplomacy.
Anytime. And let's keep this conversation going as the global situation continues to evolve. Until next time, stay curious and
indeed.
critical.